Welcome back. One of the big debates in Labor for this conference has been around climate and energy policy. Plenty on the left want Labor to do more. The government resisting that. The Minister, Chris Bowen, has been speaking about Labor's policy legacy when it comes to climate, reducing emissions. Let's have a listen in.
None will be seen as more important than the climate and the environment. And it's not just what we've done in the last 15 months, but we're carefully building the building blocks for enduring Labor reforms which will last for generations over our time in office.
Joining me now, Assistant Climate Change and Energy Minister Jenny McAllister. I know things are busy. I'll get straight into it. When Labor took power, there was a lot of hope within the left of your movement that taking power was one thing with your initial pledges, but you'd go further. You'd act more in terms of emissions reduction. We're not seeing pledges there. Is it safe to assume we won't see ramped up emissions reductions plans ahead of the next election?
Tom, we were very clear coming into government that we needed to do a couple of things. One was to increase our ambition, and you saw within the first months of government Australia notifying the UN that we intended to increase our 2030 commitment to 43% reductions. The second thing we said we needed to do was actually stabilise our climate policy, end the climate wars, and actually set about resolving the decade of denial and dysfunction that had plagued our energy system as a consequence of the Coalition's failure to land a climate policy. This has been an incredible area of focus for the government over the last 12 months. I think you've often heard Minister Bowen say that he's pleased with progress but not satisfied. There is still obviously a lot to do. We're in the midst of a significant change globally in the way that energy is produced and distributed and organised. And in the Australian context, we are also grappling with 10 years in which, as a consequence of all of that policy chaos from the Liberals, very little got done.
So casting forward, though, because that's what this conference is about, for those within the left of the Labor movement who are hoping for more ambition, the current policy is 43% emissions reduction by 2030. Is that on the table in any way? Is that a prospect to take to the next election?
Look, I think we've made it clear where our priorities lie. Minister Bowen's indicated that he is initiating shortly the process to ask the Climate Change Authority for advice on these matters. We've indicated that we will develop sectoral plans to start shaping our pathway towards net zero in 2050. But what's really needed here is a steady and predictable approach to climate policy and to energy policy. This has been missing for a decade, and I've got to say that actually across industry, but also the conservation groups, the methodical way that we're going about it, I think, has been welcomed. For my part, I really appreciate the constructive way that those organisations, both business and community, have engaged with us. They've been excellent and I think willing to talk to us in an adult and serious way.
All right, it sounds like situation normal on that front, or the status quo remains. What about the other aspect that a lot within the left are pushing for? That they point to the IPCC saying we have to limit how much new coal and gas is extracted from the ground. Can you point to any difference between the previous coalition government and your government on the new coal and gas approvals? Is there any difference in policy between the two governments?
Look, again, we've been really clear that we'll apply the environmental law to new projects, whether they're resource projects or other kinds of projects. I think the key thing to note here is that we are intending to transform our electricity system domestically to 82% renewables by 2030. Now, by any measure, that's a challenging task. It's an achievable goal, but it is a challenging one. In practice, what that means is that there will be a need for thermal generation drawn from gas in many instances beyond 2030, and that will require gas production. And so we don't seek to pretend that gas is something that we're going to eliminate from our electricity system. We're quite clear about our goals and we're quite focused on achieving them.
But the really big aspect, though, is not so much domestic use, but what we do for exports. Again, is it fair to say that what the coalition did in terms of approval processes and what you do, it's exactly the same. If there's an issue with local environment, then it might have an issue getting approved, but other than that, it gets rubber stamped. There's no sort of emissions lens placed over that.
That's the way the environmental law works generally. We seek unashamedly to focus on reducing our domestic emissions. They're the emissions that we have control over. And so, again, where you'll see the safeguard mechanism requiring our biggest emitters to reduce their own pollution. You see our plans for the electricity system, a shift to 82% renewables. You see the introduction of a national electric vehicle strategy and a plan over time to reduce the emissions intensity of our vehicle fleet. These are all ambitious policies designed to shape our domestic agenda, domestic emissions, which is the part both that we can control and that the international community asks us to control.
Okay,
emissions that are produced in other countries is a matter for them.
It is a matter for them, but I mean, let's not pretend we can't control it when we're talking about whether we export coal and gas. Is your message to someone within the movement or groups within Labor environment that want you to shut down any new coal and gas, you're not going to do that, go and talk to the Greens?
We've been really clear about our priorities, and as I've indicated, it's the domestic issues. I would never say to someone, go and talk to the Greens, because I am absolutely convinced that the only party capable of delivering climate policy for this country is the Australian Labor Party. And if you actually look at the history of our country's energy and climate policies, I think you'll see that that bears that out. I know that there are plenty of people in this party deeply committed to seeing action on climate change, and they are engaging at this conference incredibly constructively with the government. I mean, this is a big democratic institution. We're the oldest political party in the country, and we're also the party with the intellectual courage to have our debates on full display. It's not so for the Liberals and it's not so for the Greens, but it is for us. We know that when we work these things through together, we get a stronger result, and that's so far been, I think, the mood of the conference.
Jenny McAllister, appreciate your time. We'll let you get back to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.